So next up, let's take a look at the Hardscape tool. And the Hardscape tool, it's located over here in the Site Planning toolset. The icon for the Hardscape tool looks like this. And then click on that, and up here in the mode bar, this first section right here has to do with the configuration mode. Let's jump into the Hardscape tool preferences to look at that a little bit closer. Under configuration, you have an option for boundary, align boundary, or pathway. Boundary, what that does is it just allows you to draw the outline of the shape. Align boundary, that has to do with working with site models, so we won't worry about that right now. And then pathway, as long as your pathway is wide the whole length of the path, this can be a really nice tool to use. However, if you wanted to flare your pathway either at the beginning or end of it, you would need to use the configuration mode and draw it that way instead. So boundary tends to be what I use about 99% of the time. Next up, under the Draw 2D pane, over here we have the option to add a joint pattern, and Vectorworks has all sorts of different joint patterns built into this. So you can do flagstone, you can do different kinds of pavers, you can add hatches and tiles, which we're already familiar with. However, you can also control those in the attributes palette if you set this main area class to this Hardscape class option. So let's take a look at that. It's right up here at the top. And because it has these brackets at the beginning and end right there, what that means is this is essentially just kind of like a placeholder. It's not a class that actually does anything. And that's why we are able to manually control that after the fact here in the attributes palette. So that's a really easy option to select. Here under the Draw 3D pane, there's a drop-down menu for 3D type. You'll either select None or Slab. None displays the hardscape in 2D only. Slab displays the hardscape in both 2D and 3D, meaning the thickness of the material will be shown. To set the material thickness, click the Main Area Components button. The field for overall thickness is grayed out. To edit, select the component you'd like to edit. In this case, there's only one. Then click the Edit button. The thickness can now be edited in the thickness field found in the definition section. This must be a positive number. Then click OK. Before we close the Main Area Components dialog box, there's one more important setting to look at, and that's the datum. The majority of the time, the datum should be set to top of component. The datum is a reference or starting point. In this case, it refers to the elevation. When the datum is set to top of component, the material thickness will be offset below the elevation entered into the object info palette. If the datum is set to bottom of component, the material thickness will be offset above the elevation entered into the object info palette. The majority of the time in landscape design, it's more useful to know the elevation at the top of the hardscape. Think about the way a paver patio is constructed. The area is excavated first, then gravel and sand beds are compacted and leveled. Then the pavers are installed. The finished elevation is the top of the paver, which is why we set the datum to top of component. In a minute, we'll look at a comparison. Click OK to return to the Hardscape preferences. There are no other settings that we need to look at for now, so click OK one more time. Now let's draw our hardscape. I'm using smart points and the Shift key to align my corners. Let's look at this in 3D using the flyover tool. And change the render from wireframe to shaded. If I zoom in, you can see the top of the hardscape is aligned with the text. If I select the hardscape and scroll down in the Object Info palette under the Draw 3D section, you can see the elevation is set at 0. Let's pan over to one of the extrudes. Here the text is at Z0 elevation, and the bottom of the extrude is at bottom Z0 with a positive extrude of 4 inches. Extrudes can be either positive or negative numbers, but remember, hardscapes can only be positive. Let's change this extrude to -4. Now the top of the elevation is level with the text that is at Z0. Let's go back and create a second hardscape, this time with the datum set to bottom of main component. Same steps as before, select the Hardscape tool, click Tool Preferences, go to Draw 3D, click Main Area Components, Select bottom of component, click OK, click OK, and draw. Now let's look at this in 3D. The second hardscape is 3.5 inches above Z0. Let's scroll down in the Object Info palette to the Draw 3D section. If grade is 0, this hardscape is 3.5 inches above grade. Whereas the first hardscape is still 3.5 inches thick, but it is level with grade. Notice as I click back and forth between the two hardscapes, the parameters in the thickness and elevation fields are the same, even though the second hardscape is 3.5 inches higher in elevation. Just remember, the vast majority of the time, you'll want the datum set to top of the main component. If you use that as your default, you shouldn't have any problems. The datum can be edited after the hardscape has been placed in the drawing. But before we do that, first, notice that there are loci points on both hardscapes. For hardscape 1, the loci is at the top, and for hardscape 2, the loci is at the bottom. That's an easy way to visually verify the datum setting for a hardscape. I'll select the second hardscape with the loci at the bottom. Then in the Object Info palette, under the Draw 3D section, click the Main Area Components button. Select Top of Component and click OK. Since both hardscapes are now identical, I'll delete the second hardscape. So one word of warning right here, I have had students in the past confuse the hardscape tool with the slab tool. They may look the same, they do some of the same operations, but they are different. So you're going to want to make sure that you're using the correct tool. So the hardscape tool, as we've already learned, is here in the site planning tool set, and they look similar. That's why it's easy to confuse them. So that's what the hardscape tool looks like. If we go to the building shell, this is what the slab tool looks like. So make sure that you are using the hardscape tool. The reason why is that as you start working with site models, you can use your hardscape in order to come up with site modifiers automatically for your drawing. Another thing I would like to teach you about the hardscape tool is that there are presets for different hardscapes that Vectorworks has created. If you come up here, I have the hardscape tool active. If I come up to the mode bar for this first drop-down menu under hardscapes, if I click on that, in the resource manager, it's going to show me all of the preset hardscapes that Vectorworks has already created for us. And so I can just double click on any of those and then start drawing in the file. And there you have it. I automatically see the top plan view that they wanted displayed there. And then when I come here into 3D, I can also see the texture that's been assigned to that style. And one thing that's a little bit different on these Vectorworks styles is that they're based on different components. So the hardscape that I made, it just has one thickness of one material, in this case concrete. And the preset that Vectorworks has in the file, they're actually showing the construction detail of how this piece of hardscape would be made with all of the different levels and layers of material. In some cases, it may look like there's an issue with your hardscape not rendering correctly in 3D. If this happens, the first thing to check is your render mode. Hardscapes rendered in wireframe will appear invisible. To show the texture of the hardscape in a 3D view, set the render mode to shaded. If every time you switch between a top plan view and a 3D view it renders as wireframe, there's a default that can be changed so it automatically renders as shaded. Go to the Tools menu, Options submenu, select Vectorworks Preferences. Click the 3D pane. Then using the default 3D render mode field, select Shaded in the drop-down menu. Now every time you switch views, it will render in the shaded mode.